Hi, this is Jessica Kramer, and we're going to be going over my summary of assessments for the student Weston. He was 7 years old in the second grade, loves Ninja Camp, which is like American Ninja Warrior Camp for kids, haunted Legos, and his iPad. The assessments given were the Wiley Blevins Phonemic Awareness Assessment, the Core Phonics Assessment, the Core Fluency Assessment, the Qualitative Spelling Inventory, and I will get into which inventory I gave him when we get to that section, and the Writing Assessment. During the Wiley Blevins Phonemic Awareness Assessment, there were quite a few areas that he had not quite mastered yet. There were a few areas that were just not mastered by like one or two small questions, but there were a few that struggled is a strong word, but there were a few areas that he had a bit of a tough time with. So in rhyming was one of the areas where he kind of got it, but kind of didn't. So when asked if cat and hat rhymed, he responded no, but when asked if pig and wig rhymed, he responded yes. When asked to supply words that rhymed with the words that I said, for the most part, well, for every question, he was not able to supply words that rhymed, but he was to a point supplying words that he felt made sense to the words I was saying. For example, one of the combo of words was wing and king. He said crown because he heard king and just thought crown, like that's something that a king wears. So I understood where his thought process was going, but it wasn't what we were asking, so it was marked as not mastered. We moved into oral blending. He was able to do most of that really well. I think he just wasn't super paying attention when we did me because I said e and he responded money. Moving into oral segmentation, he did really well when asked to segment. When I would, I'm sorry, he did pretty well. The only thing was that he doesn't seem to completely understand how syllables worked in a word. I asked him how many syllables he heard in the word map, and he said two because he separated it as app because that was how he heard it. Moving into the last portion of segmentation, he was asked down to break down the word I, and he just segmented it as my, like just one sound altogether. For phonemic manipulation, he was asked to say the first portion of that. He was asked to say the words without the beginning sound. He got the first four correct, but when we got to bike and stop, when asked to say bike without the b sound, he said eek. And when asked to say stop without the s sound, he said stop. Without the first sound, he said op. So he was confused because it should have been top. I'm sorry. So the next one, he was asked to replace this first sound with the S sound, so the S sound. When asked to replace the M in mad with S, he said smad. And then with run, he said srun. With cat, he said with cat, he said sat. There were just a few. Then another one was when asked to replace the beginning sound in chip with the sound, he said ship because he was replacing the letter. In general, he did not meet mastery in several areas, but when we begin instruction, we want to begin instruction in the first area that he did not reach mastering. So we would plan to begin working with him in rhyming words. There are many amazing rhyming word activities, and that is where I would recommend beginning him in his phonemic awareness journey. Moving on into the core phonics assessment, Weston did fairly well identifying the letters. Well, he identified all of the letters. So looking at the letters, uppercase and lowercase, he was able to tell me what all of them were. When it came to the sounds, some of his consonant sounds were a little confused. He didn't know a few and then would get some of them confused. So for example, the L he said was I. For X, he said was the K sound. Um, he did not know Q or W, and for Y said E. For the long vowel sounds, for the most part, he did pretty well. He said, for the long vowel sounds, he said E correctly. He did not know I at all. He said A and O correctly, and for U, he said ya. When working on the short vowel sounds, the only two that he was able to identify correctly were O and U. He said and ah for each of those. Moving into short vowels in CVC words, this is where he began to struggle quite a bit more. He would try to sound out a word, but halfway through trying to sound it out would just guess at what it was. So even throughout the rest of this assessment, most of it was him just trying to guess at what the word was based on the first sound. And when I was giving the assessment, I watched him go, for example, the word was stop. Well, for example, the word was silk. He looked at it, he'd go sick. He could figure out the first two sounds, but then after that, he just kind of went with what he felt might be the word. And that was most of the second portion of this test was during the reading and decoding. The word was harm, he said hum. The word was dirt, he said deer. The word was fern, he said fren. The word was toe, he said taw. He still got quite a few, he still got a few correct in each section, but when we got to the multisyllabic words, he told me, I cannot read any of these. I'm not going to be able to read these. I asked him to try and to do his best, but he told me that he was not going to be able to do it. So he did try, but they were not correct, and he was getting very discouraged. So we just kind of quickly went through the last few of them, and we just moved on from there. In the core phonics assessment, instruction begins in the first section that the student does not reach benchmark, and in this case, it's in consonant sounds. So it's very important for us to go back with Weston and make sure that he has the concept of all of the consonant sounds down correctly. He needs to be able to look at a consonant and know what sound it makes, because when he is reading, he needs to be able to make the correct sound so that he's able to decode the words. Then moving into long and short vowels, so that way he's able to read and spell words correctly later on. We're going to move on to the core fluency assessment. Weston, I'll be really honest, Weston did a lot better at this assessment than I thought he was going to, especially with the first two assessments being what they were. The first one he struggled quite a bit with, and he only got through 23 words in the time. And I had told him that there was a timer, and I think it stressed him out a little bit more, so he was like really trying to like blaze through them as much as he could, so he wasn't as focused. When we got into the second and third assessment, he was doing a little bit better. There was a lot of sounding out, and due to what the assessment is, after 3 seconds, if a student is not able to get the correct word, it is supposed to be given to them and marked as incorrect, and that is what happened for most of the words. Some of the words were almost guessing, but then at the same time, kind of sight word situation where he was able to guess it but be correct because it was a very common word. And there were a few times where in the first assessment and the second assessment more, but kind of it happened a few times in the third assessment where he had seen the same word a few times and still was not getting it correct, but then the last time he saw it right before the assessment ended, he got it correct. So with that being said, he's estimated to be in the 25th percentile. He is not considered fluent. When not considered fluent, a phonics or sight word assessment has to be given as well. I had already given a phonics assessment, so I was able to identify where he should begin his instruction. Instruction begins, to help with fluency, instruction begins in phonics. So in the phonics area, we're going right back to consonant sounds. He needs to be able to know all of the consonant sounds so that he's able to decode these words and to read them. For the qualitative spelling inventory assessment, I made a judgment call and decided to give him the primary spelling inventory. This inventory is usually recommended for kindergarten and first grade, But after having given the other assessments, I felt that it would be best for me to try him on this assessment first. And if it went better than expected, then I would give him the next assessment as well. But I am glad that I went with this assessment. He did really well in the first couple of sections. So initial consonant, he did great. Final consonant, he did great. Short vowel, he did pretty well. Diagraphs, blends, pretty well again, better than expected, which was really exciting. When we got to long vowels and we got to the more challenging parts and features of words is where he began to struggle quite a bit. So his assessed spelling stage became middle letter name alphabetic. And for spelling, instruction begins where a student misses 2 or more feature points. So I decided to move him into representing short vowels correctly. This is an area that he struggled with in reading as well. So it just, to me, it felt perfect because it's something that it's going to be like a double whammy. He's going to get it in both areas and it's going to help him so much. So some first word study examples that I found that I felt would be beneficial for him were words such as trap, trick, truck, drum, and more. I really wanted to include those diagraphs and blends as much as possible in the words as well, because he did so well in those areas that I want to continue to challenge him with the short vowels, but then also still make sure that he's staying strong in those other areas while also growing and learning more as we go. Finally, into the writing assessment, I did a narrative writing assessment with Weston. Let me move that for you. I'm so sorry. He was asked, we had a whole conversation. So we sat down, we had a conversation. I told him, we are going to write a story and you get to tell me about a time in your life. And it can be absolutely anything in your whole life. It can be something happy. It can be something that made you really angry. It can be something that made you really sad. So first, we're going to brainstorm. I said, we're going to think of some times in our lives. And I gave him some examples. I said, there was this one time in my life where I was really happy. Like, I went to the beach and we had so much fun and it was a vacation with my parents. So I wrote down happy beach and I was showing him, without giving him answers, I was giving him some examples of what I was brainstorming. So then I asked him to give me an example of a time that he wanted to share with me. He told me that he wanted to share something that made him sad or angry. And I said, okay, absolutely, it's your story. Why don't you work on your brainstorm and then we'll move straight into your writing. So he brainstormed, all he wrote was angry and brother. So I said, okay, so go ahead and write your story. While you're writing your story, I'm going to write my story. So I wrote my story, he was writing his, and after a few minutes, he told me, he said, I am finished. Are you so ready to read my story? And I said, yes, actually, I'm very excited to read your story. I read his story and I made sure to include it into the slides so that you could see exactly what he wrote so that it would be a little more clear on everything else. So Weston's story said, when my brother pinched me, it make me feel sad because I feel sad because it hurted. So moving into the assessment of this writing, Weston's writing earned a score of 1 because there was no organization to the event and no opening or closure. We don't know why his brother pinched him. We don't know. There was no introduction to my brother and I were playing, so that is the purpose. That is the reason that he got that score. For development and elaboration, he earned a score of 1 because the narrative provided minimal elaboration using few to no details or description. All we really know is that he was pinched and that it made him feel sad and it hurt. For conventions, he earned a score of 0, which it's demonstrated little to no command of conventions, including not much correct spelling or punctuation and no punctuation. For instruction, it is suggested that he begin working on writing. He needs to be writing all the time about anything and everything. So my big suggestion would be to start a family message journal with him and even a teacher message journal where the teacher is writing him notes and he's trying to work on reading them, or the teacher is reading through them with him. And then he is also writing back. So that way he's getting it on both ends. He's reading, but then also writing. Thank you so much for watching my assessment.